As entrepreneurs, we all have a reason why we chose to leave our 9 to 5 for an 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. I'm here to capture those stories of why we all hustle and grind for our companies. Kelly is a therapist turned career and life coach focused on helping burnt out young professionals find and live their best life. Using her 14 years of experience as a licensed counselor, combined with her focused training on career coaching, Kelly brings a unique perspective to the career world, speaking to the interplay of our mental health and our careers. Kelly, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. And I love specifically what you do, especially having a mother as a psychologist. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I love what you guys, I love what you do. And I love specifically what you do, where you're not just a therapist, you're also a life coach and an entrepreneur. And I think that that's a niche that is difficult to find. I don't think that I don't know if you've seen other people in your industry, because I've never thought about that mix before. But how did that happen? Like, how did you get into this niche of helping entrepreneurs as a therapist?
Mm-hmm. I started with what I knew, right? Like I started with the therapy where and I feel like there's a little backstory that helps.
Yeah.
I worked for another business for 11 years. I think I worked in the same private practice for someone else. And then we moved. And when we
Mm-hmm.
moved, I said, I don't want to work for anybody else. I would rather just do my own thing. And so I figured out how to get a really small business started seeing some therapy clients virtually and absorbed as much information as I could. And as I went, I thought, oh, like I can do this. And that grew. And um, I've been transitioning into really this life coaching side of things. And it's almost like I got to repeat the starting my therapy business. I got to repeat the steps, but in a more strategic way because I had done it
Mm-hmm.
once. So
Yep.
now I could do it with a little bit more understanding of how that process worked and where I would need help or what I would want to do first, second, or third.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it really began at what I knew and I kept growing on it from there.
Mm-hmm. And so it's like having kids. The first one's the hardest, the second one's easier because you've been down that road before.
Yeah. My therapy
Yeah.
business was like my guinea pig business in a way. I to be fair though, my husband actually ran his own construction business for a little while. And so he has ADHD. And
Yep.
so
We all do.
I I often stepped into I talk that I grow up in a home with ADHD with my kids and my husband and everyone, so I almost understand the world even better that way. But I don't think I actually have ADHD. I think I just function in the world well. And so when I watched him run his business, I had those moments of I could do this. I could run my own business, and then we moved. And so that's where that actually came from, I think.
You hit
Mhm.
something really that I'm a huge advocate for is that most of the entrepreneurs I know have some level of ADHD, and it's
Mhm.
something that's really, there's a negative stigma to it in the society, but it is our
Mhm.
superpower. We're amazing
Yeah.
visionaries. We are really dedicated. We can get hyper focused on one thing and go in one direction really well.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
think that we need somebody else who isn't to step in as our integrator, as our implementer, to just kind of come back and
Mhm.
say, okay, great. Which two of those good ideas are we going to
Yeah.
implement
Or
now? And you got
hey,
to help us guide,
how about we
support us.
finish that one project you're
Yeah.
working on and then we'll move on kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Well,
Uh-huh.
exactly, because we're really good at that vision side of things, but it's the
Mhm.
other side of, now that it's no longer the shiny object, having that
Yeah.
support from somebody else to be able to just kind of take the ball and run really is
Mhm.
helpful for us. And I think as a therapist, that's where I see that strength is you can you've been trained in how to handle these things and what the indications are and stuff like
Mhm.
that, and are able to kind of work as an implementer, as an integrator, to be able to show business people, here's a blind spot. Here's something that you
Mhm.
want to take a look at. Here's how to use what I heard referred to as our neurospicy brains to their highest potential. And then also being
Mhm.
able to kind of, here's where you're not good at. And here's some other
Yeah.
things like me, bookkeeping. I hate bookkeeping, like with
Uh-huh.
nuclear capability, because I'm not good at it. It's not how my brain thinks. I mean, I have a business degree. I know the theory behind it. It's just not
Mhm.
it's not how my brain works. So I think it's really interesting and nice how you have it, where it's like, you were able to help your husband and see some of those problems that we have and be able to mitigate.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
Nice.
Mhm.
Cool, cool. So was there a reason why you got into therapy? Like what made you go in that career path? Like, was there some
Hmm.
sort of a thing that you did or some one moment, or was it just sort of, I always wanted to go, or like, what was that?
So here's the funny thing. And the because a lot of my work is career coaching.
Hmm.
So I do firmly believe that living out living out our purpose
Uh-huh.
exists in a lot of career paths. And so I don't have to be a therapist to live out my purpose.
Hmm.
Um, but what I joke about is that I probably followed this really weird rabbit trail of, as a child, I wanted to be a zookeeper because I got to work with animals. And then I learned that they work on Christmas. So I didn't want to be a zookeeper anymore. And then I was like, okay, well, I could be a veterinarian because they probably don't work on Christmas. And as I started off going to college thinking that way,
Hmm.
but I started to learn the type of work I would need to do to get there. And I just didn't want to. But I realized with some exploration that I wanted to be a veterinarian because I wanted to help the people who are grieving their lost animals. And I
Hmm.
was like, hey, maybe there's something else there I need to look
Interesting.
at. So I leaned into therapy because it made sense of wanting to help people.
Hmm.
And then it continued to grow. I mean, even my life coaching and career coaching that I do with people, it
Hmm.
grew out of grad school where I attended a internship that gave me opportunities to do career work with students. And so every single moment it was, hey, I like this. I want to keep doing this.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So it sounded like you kind of had this life, you had the path. It was finding the specific stones that you needed in your career to be
Mhm.
able to make that go in that direction.
Mhm. Yep.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah.
So now, as far as like life coaching and things like that, that's a really broad topic. Like, there's a lot
Yeah.
of things inside coaching. It's like saying
Yeah.
cereal. There's a lot of
Yeah.
different things. There's
Yeah.
Cheerios, there's cinnamon toast. Yeah, yeah. What
Mhm.
specific parts of life coaching do you focus on, and what are you really good at? Like, what's your ninja skill in the life coaching therapy mix that you have?
Mhm. Uh, First and foremost, I would say my ninja skill is about helping quite, and this is hard to put into words sometimes, but literally opening space for people to breathe in their ideas.
Mm.
That sometimes I joke, sometimes I'll do a discovery call with a person and they're done with it and they're, thank you so much for that. I think I'm good to go. And I'm like, that's awesome, but
Uh-huh.
I think that there's so much joy for me that I can create space for people to really look at what they're doing.
Mhm.
And a big part of the life coaching that I do starts with people who are stuck and burnt out.
Mm.
Because it's a huge thing right now, right? Burnout is this thing that everybody is dealing with because we are constantly going and doing, but burnout is a place of I can't do anymore.
Mhm.
So what do I do now, Kaylee? And so my work begins at burnout and
Mhm.
it moves into first creating space where we start that recovery and
Mhm.
then moves into, okay, let's plan better this time. Let's figure out what moving forward with purpose actually means for you.
Mhm.
Because you can live like I said about myself, like you can live your purpose in any way, but that's where your life comes from. That's where that drive comes from, not
Mhm.
from finding a good job.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And
Hmm.
just something that I've noticed over the years, especially as guys, I mean, this is something that guys really need, is that purpose. And if we don't have it, it can be very difficult for us to function. And
Hmm.
finding that purpose is, I think, really important. And I love the fact that you kind of found that purpose. You found yet reason.
Yeah.
You found that thing that you love to do. And I love what you
Yeah.
said about kind of being on discovery calls and people are like, oh, dude, I feel so much better. What that shows to me is that you're really an expert at it. That this is something
Hmm.
that is just intrinsically in your heart. You have this as your thing, and
Hmm.
you're just really, really good at it. We were talking about kind of
Yeah.
before the show a little bit about being so good at something that it just intrinsically comes that, good. Awesome. And
Hmm.
when you're talking about burnout, I know one of my previous guests had talked about the cult of busy. I think it is a huge thing where busy can mean different things. And
Hmm.
tell me a little bit about some of the experiences you've had or that of with your clients or what you've
Hmm.
seen them do and some of the things you've been able to help them overcome. Like, as far
Hmm.
as specifically that being burned out because we feel like we have to be busy.
Hmm. I, I think the first thing everybody encounters is this, I am burnt out. What do I have to do? Like, that's why I
Mhm.
talk about burnout is so much about what do I need to stop doing? What do I need to release or let go of in my life? And that, in my experience, is the number one thing that is the hardest. Um,
It's scary as hell.
We, yeah,
Yeah.
because we are,
Yeah.
I think most of us in this world now, especially in kind of the more individualistic society, we are so much about achievement. And a lot of the work that I do with people, we do a values assessment on work values. And I would say 90% of people want achievement over recognition. And I describe achievement as that's that inner pride. I know I'm doing well. I know I'm growing and advancing. Whereas recognition is somebody else knowing that you're growing and advancing.
Mhm.
And so almost everybody I talk to now, achievement ranks, if not the top, it's the first or second.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think that that's a big thing. It's getting people to say, how can we make sure that
Mhm.
you still have that sense of even rest is helping you grow,
Hmm.
you know?
Interesting. And I think that's something we think rest is not productive. And
Mm,
especially if you're starting a business and you're in the hustle and you're the CEO or the chief everything officer.
mhm.
What do you see
Yeah.
with some of your clients when they get to that point? Like, especially the ones that are just that are in what I call the suck. Embrace the suck, just go forward, keep moving. What are some of the things that you've seen your clients do incorrectly? And
Mm,
what I have this theory that some people are examples of what not to do, some are examples of what to do. They're really good
mhm,
examples. Both of are really good examples. What have you seen, like as far as what people have done to be able to to overcome that, and to also realize sometimes rest is productive? What
mhm.
just out of your experience? Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, I was just talking to somebody about this, and I think right now I'm hearing the term bridge job a lot, and I'm sure we all are, that we're hearing about these jobs that get you to somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I almost want to change the language and say sometimes we need a recovery job first. We need something that allows us the space to take care of ourselves. And again, when you enter into a career or an occupation, understanding that it is not the job title that gives you your purpose, it's how you work through that job title, then you are allowed to rest. You are allowed to have jobs where you are simply recovering because you are also finding your purpose and living that out. And so I find one thing that helps a lot of clients is reframing how they look at the work they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of it being my work is my identity, it becomes my work is just one way that I show people my identity, but it does not define me,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Which brings out a really interesting topic, because we were talking earlier about how, as entrepreneurs, our work-life balance is very different than what most
Mhm,
people's 9 to 5 work-life balance
mhm,
are. It's like there's a reason we chose an 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. It sounds insane. It sounds toxic. It sounds weird, but I think it's
mhm,
more just we have such a passion for it that this is our child. We're raising it.
mhm.
But it also, I'd like you to talk maybe a little bit more about that, and in the context, to talk a little bit more about kind of what that looks like to most of your
Mhm.
clients, that difference in that work-life balance.
Yeah. So I I talk about work-life harmony
Okay.
because
I
we
love it.
think of balance as 50-50. And
Yeah.
it's just not, like
No.
work-life balance would be, okay, I played the right hand part on the piano and now I play the left hand part, whereas we want to integrate the two. We want
Mhm.
to find ways that we are, on Monday, maybe it's a heavy work day, but on Tuesday, it's a day of planning for the week. Who knows? But it's integrated into how your life looks. On a
Mhm.
personal level, I do this through recognizing like how switching modes works for me. So switching from therapist mode to coach mode to mom mode to friend mode, that is a lot of switching. And
Mhm.
so for me, a lot of times my work schedule, which people say, how can you even do that? It can be a 10-hour therapist day, but
Mhm.
but if I'm not switching modes, that's coasting for me.
Mhm.
Whereas if I am therapist for 3 hours, mom for 2 hours, then back to therapist for 2 hours, even though I've only done 5 hours of therapy work, I feel more tired.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think it's really important to know what works for you
Mhm.
and finding the times, especially with energy kind of dispersal, for lack of a better word, you need to find when you're the most energized to do certain types of work. Or when there's hard work to do, you choose to do that hard work at the time that you know you have the most reserves available to
Mhm.
you, you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. And so like with me, I know deep work in the morning. is a
Yeah.
big thing. 2 or 3 o'clock, I am not doing deep work. It's just not going to
Yeah.
happen. I know my body well enough. And I think it's understanding. I
Yeah.
love that you said the harmony, because
Yeah.
you're right. It isn't 50-50. Not, very much
Mhm.
not. And we really are based, as entrepreneurs, we are always going to be working. We were talking earlier about, I with my team, I make sure they understand that if I am emailing you at 7 p.m. on a Sunday, I don't expect a
Mhm.
response, because I need some, I'd like you have your own balance there, but it's more just to get it off
Mhm.
my head so I don't forget about it, because that's kind of
Yeah.
how I roll. I will forget about it and I don't want to. So, here you go.
Mhm.
But finding a harmony in it. And I love how you said that, because I think time blocking is a big thing that people are talking about right now.
Mhm.
And it sounds
Mhm.
like you're advocating for something similar to that, where I know I'm really good at X things at this time and I don't have to
Mhm.
keep shifting. Yeah. And one of the things I learned from my mom is that we don't shift easily. When we're
No.
shifting thought patterns, it's difficult. There's a lot of energy. Yeah.
Mhm. Yep. And think about a car. Like when a car is shifting gears, it's spending the most gas.
Mhm.
And a lot of we're like cars in that way.
Yeah.
When we're shifting gears, that's when we're spending the most energy for ourselves.
Hmm. Now, I want to go back to something else that you said about identity in
Mhm.
business. I think a lot of times
Mhm.
there are some people that have their 9 to 5 job as an identity, but as business owners and as entrepreneurs, we also have our identity is hooked a lot to our business.
Mhm.
Talk a little bit about how some of your clients have navigated those waters. Like what's the difference between the
Mhm.
two of those situations, and how can we navigate them? What's the easiest way to find that, like you said, harmony in that
Mhm.
world? Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so we get stuck in saying, what we do. We start with the job title, when I think a lot of times we need to talk about what we're passionate about. We need to talk about, and I feel like I'm kind of repeating things that I've heard from others. I'm like, yes, that's so true, and I want to repeat that into the world.
Yep.
But we need to speak on the things that we love doing
Mhm.
versus the title that
Mhm.
defines us. And so I'll encourage people a lot of times, instead of when somebody says, "Hey, what do you do?" or "What do you, what's your job?" or something like that, I'll tell them, start the sentence with, "I'm really passionate about fill in the blank,"
Mhm.
because that leads you into talking about your purpose as opposed to the job description kind of
Mhm.
thing.
And I think that in a 9 to 5 job, it really is, this is my title, this is what it is. And yep.
Hmm.
Whereas with entrepreneurs, I know I'm like, I don't
Hmm.
talk to my family often about what I do, because they're so sick and tired of hearing it, because I'm so passionate about it. I am always
Yeah.
thinking, I am always
Yep.
talking about keynotes and
Hmm.
presentations and better ways to do it. And I figure you probably have the same thing going on as well, or your
Hmm.
husband's talking about construction because he really loves construction for these reasons, and I wanted to bring that. The balance is different, and I wanted
Yeah.
I wanted you to kind of have a chance to say something on that, because I think it really
Hmm.
is it's part of that different world that people don't understand about
Hmm.
entrepreneurs. Is this is why we're so crazy. I mean, and we're crazy, like Steve Jobs says, and I always love quoting this part of his address to the graduating class at Stanford, that we're the ones that are crazy enough
Hmm.
to change the world. But
Yeah.
understanding what that crazy is, it's a little
Hmm.
different.
Yeah.
Comes
I
from.
was I was listening to Simon Sinek's podcast, and
Yeah.
it was an earlier one, but they talked about, there's even a difference between business owners and entrepreneurs. And business owners can run a business, but entrepreneurs are focused on that changing things.
Mhm.
They're the innovators and the ones that are seeking to make something different with what they're doing.
The
So,
visionaries, the ones who
yeah.
truly see things completely.
Hmm.
Adam Savage says this, and he's actually got a T-shirt out on it, from MythBusters. Says, "I reject
Hmm.
your reality and I substitute my own." And
Yeah.
that's really what we
Yep.
do. We reject your reality. We're going to substitute our own. We're going to do
Hmm.
this. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think there's a level of passion that has to come in that too, just because
Hmm.
that's the only. Sometimes passion is the only thing that when things aren't going right and everything's going the wrong way, and you just got kicked in the gut about 7 times in the same
Yep.
hour. Now it's that passion's what keeps us going, right?
100%.
Cool, cool, cool. So, you said that you kind of do an intro. I want you to talk a little bit more about exactly your style. Like, what would it look like if I became a client? First of all,
Yeah.
who's an ideal client for you? Like, who are people that
Mm-hmm.
you feel like you can help the most?
Mm-hmm. When you're a business owner and you have to come up with that business strategy and everything, and they ask you to come up with your target audience and everything, that was
Uh-huh.
a battle for me. I will full disclosure, that was a big battle for me because I wanted to help everybody.
Uh-huh.
Um, but my specialty actually lies in healthcare workers who are just done.
Mm.
I absolutely love helping people who they still want to help. I think that that's why I love that group of career people, is that I just they still want to help, and they're almost sad that they're burnt out, because it feels like they're losing that identity, when I want to be able to step in and say, you can still help people, let's find the way to do it so that you're not running to the ground anymore. And
Mhm.
so a large part of my work, and I always tell people, like, it changes after kind of the initial part, but the initial part kind of stays the same every time, where we have that call, that discovery call that allows you to kind of see what it's like to work with me. I
Mhm.
go through actually a career assessment in the discovery call, just to kind of give people a taste of, this is some feedback that you can take and run with. And that's why I joke. Sometimes people will say, hey, that's good, I appreciate that, I'll let you know if I
Yeah.
want more help. But that's just the beginning of the work, because that might give you some basic answers on, okay, this is where I'll thrive, but now what?
Mhm.
And that's where I really step in and I will ask the hard questions. Some of my favorite moments are when somebody gets pulled back into their ideas that weren't helping them, and me going, hey, we already talked about this. Like, this was
Mhm.
actually where burnout existed for you. What could we do differently this time? And so, really leaning into challenge those moments of falling back into the ruts that got us stuck in the first place. And so, while it is structured in the sense of giving feedback and talking through a game plan and a strategy, it's also a constant kind of listening and evaluating and saying, hey, I know where this story goes. Let's talk about it.
Exactly. And having that outside objective observer to be able to say, I see this happening again.
Yeah.
Somebody who's trained to be
Yeah.
able to see those cycles, because we do get stuck in them. It's not
Mhm.
hard to get stuck in those cycles again.
Mm-mm.
And
Mm-mm.
especially when you're under a situation where I was talking with the other day with a good friend of mine, Sean, who's been a serial entrepreneur for years. And we're like, our baseline stress level is most people's panic.
Mhm.
You're more likely to go back into those old patterns because they
Oh,
seem
yeah.
to have worked, right?
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. Like, think about, this may sound like a weird metaphor, but think about like a baseball swing. They'll tell you, keep your elbows up, or whatever. It's like you're dropping your elbows.
Mhm.
It's so easy to, when you've gotten used to doing something a certain way, it's so easy for you to drop your elbow. It's so easy for you to fall back into that old form, you know.
Absolutely. And yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely is. So,
Mhm.
as we're getting towards the end of things, I do have one question that I ask everyone, and that is, what is
Mhm.
one book or podcast that has had a significant impact on your life? And I'm super liberal with the
Yeah.
definition on this. I have people double dipping, whatever it is,
Sure.
just something that's really, what I like to do is to give back to the audience and this is how I started
Absolutely.
off with just my huge book list.
Hmm.
So what is one book or podcast that has had a significant impact on your life?
Hmm. When you sent me this question ahead of time, I was like, oh man, I can only pick one.
Well, not
but
necessarily. I've had a few
but no,
people
no,
say a
no.
couple.
I yeah. I think about it in terms of, if people could only read one book, and
Mhm.
it made all the difference in the world. It's a weird one to recommend in this circumstance, but it's Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference.
Mhm.
And it's technically a book on negotiation. It's
Yes.
technically a book about, having those crucial conversations. It's a book on conversations. It's a book on kind of that self exploration and knowing your value and your worth. Like, it hits a lot more than just conversation. And so that would be, to me, one of the big, I quote and reference to, and tell people to go read that book all the time. And so that's the one that I would say.
So what are some specific takeaways that you got from that book? Like, because I like to put these books into another context, because often we look at a
Yeah.
book going, oh, that's a sales book.
Yep.
Well, it might not be. There might be some more to it.
Yeah.
What are some
Yeah.
things you got out of it?
So, first and foremost, it does teach you some communication skills that in therapy get taught in different ways, but they still get taught. And so, a lot of times I'll say, hey, it even teaches you how to reflect something without asking a question, because we get caught in questions sometimes of, hey, what about this? Hey, what about this? Hey, what about this? And it just teaches you basic conversation tools in that sense. It teaches you negotiation skills. It talks to you about, hey, here's some ways to go about negotiating. That if somebody wants it for negotiation, that is a fantastic way to use it.
Mhm.
But I think one of my favorite ways is it also talks about, you have to get on the same level as other people. It's later in the book. I want to say it's like find the black swan kind of moment or something like that, is, I think, is the name of the chapter, but talks about, it's not just about saying the right things. You have to be in that person's world when you're talking to them. And teaching that to people is so powerful, not just in negotiation, but in being in this world, connecting with people. And so I think it's fantastic for business owners in that sense too.
Mm-hmm. And as anyone who has had children knows, negotiation isn't just about business.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And we are constantly negotiating. We are negotiating with
Mhm.
ourselves. We are negotiating with people. We're negotiating.
Mhm.
There's so many different things we negotiate with. I still think it's a great book, and
Yeah.
it can bring a lot to our lives. Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Kelly, thank you so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, of course. It was great to be here.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining us on the Hustle and Grind podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Kelly, check out the link in the description.